Something happened in the Persian Gulf today that nobody is putting together properly. A public statement went out telling commercial ships to enter one of the most dangerous waterways on Earth. And within 1 hour of a declaration that the conflict was essentially over, an American-owned oil tanker was on fire. But here's the thing. Those ships did not stumble into danger. I mean, you have seen conflicts escalate before, but this one is different. This time, the ships were told to go, publicly by name, with the words, "Show some guts." Every intelligence agency disagreed. Every maritime insurer on Earth had already pulled out, and the U.S. Navy had quietly stopped escorting vessels through that same water days earlier. The ships went in anyway. Iran was waiting. And by the end of the day, 3 commercial vessels had been struck. The world's most important energy corridor was officially declared a danger zone, and the Pentagon handed Congress a number that should concern every single person watching this, regardless of where you live. But what does this actually mean for fuel prices in your country? And why is the U.S. Navy now saying it will not be going back into that water anytime soon? Well, let me explain. Disclaimer. To understand what happened today, you have to go back to a single moment earlier this week. With the Strait of Hormuz in a state of serious disruption and global energy markets watching nervously, a public statement was made telling commercial oil tankers to enter the strait regardless of the threats coming from Iran. The message, as it was widely reported and circulated, was essentially, do not be intimidated, show some guts, go through. Now let us be clear about what the Strait of Hormuz actually is for people who are not familiar with it. It is a narrow waterway, at its most narrow point, only about 33 kilometers wide, between Iran and Oman. And through that narrow gap flows somewhere between 15 and 20% of all the oil traded in the entire world every single day. If you drive a car, heat your home, fly anywhere, or buy anything that was transported by ship, your life is connected to what happens in that water. And that water, at the time of the statement, was already in a highly dangerous state. Iran had publicly declared the strait to be under its control. Reports had emerged, though at that point unconfirmed, that underwater obstacles may have been placed in the shipping lanes. And every major maritime insurance provider on Earth had already suspended coverage for vessels attempting to transit the area. Insurance providers do not suspend coverage for fun. They suspend it when they calculate that the risk of catastrophic loss is too high to price. That is a serious signal, and it was being sent loudly. But the statement went out, and some tanker operators, apparently taking the public reassurance seriously, began moving their vessels toward the strait. What none of them knew, or what none of them were being told clearly enough, was what had quietly been confirmed just hours before their ships entered the water. And here is the detail that almost nobody in the mainstream coverage is leading with, and it is arguably the most important piece of the whole story. Just one day before the tankers were publicly encouraged to enter the strait, U.S. officials had stated there was no indication that Iran was placing underwater mines in the shipping lanes. No indication. That was the official position. Then, within 24 hours, that position changed completely. U.S. officials confirmed that Iran had in fact placed mines in the Strait of Hormuz, and the description they used for those mines was striking. They were described as the most destructive weapons that the U.S. Navy has faced. That phrase did not come from Iran. It did not come from an opposition politician or a critical analyst. It came from the U.S. military itself, describing weapons placed in a waterway where commercial ships had just been publicly told to go. Let me put that in terms that make sense for regular people. Imagine being told that a road is completely safe to drive on. You get in your car, you start driving, and then you find out, while you are already on the road, that the people who told you it was safe had just discovered landmines on it and had not updated their advice. That is the situation the tanker crews found themselves in today. And Iran, for its part, had not been subtle about its intentions. Earlier in the week, Iranian officials had openly stated that the strait was now under the full control of the IRGC Navy, Iran's most elite naval force. They were not hiding what they were doing. They were announcing it. Tell me in the comments, did you hear about the mines before watching this video? Because I have spoken to a lot of people today, and almost none of them knew this part of the story. Drop your country below. I read every single one. The first vessel to be struck was the Safe CA Vishnu, a U.S.-owned oil tanker operating in the Persian Gulf near the Iraqi coast. According to reports, it was targeted by an underwater drone. This was the first U.S.-owned commercial tanker to be struck since this conflict began. Not a military vessel, a commercial ship carrying energy cargo. The term underwater drone is worth pausing on for a moment because it is easy to hear and not fully process. These are not the kind of drones people think of when they imagine something flying overhead. These are autonomous or remotely guided watercraft that travel beneath the surface, invisible to the naked eye, difficult to detect on radar, and designed to approach a vessel from below where its hull is most exposed. They are a relatively new form of naval threat, and they are significantly harder to defend against than a conventional surface attack. Within hours of the first strike, A second American-owned tanker was reported hit in the same area. Then reports emerged of a third vessel being struck by what was described as an Iranian fast boat, with several other ships in the vicinity reported to be on fire. 3 commercial ships, one day. In a waterway where tanker operators had been publicly encouraged to sail just hours earlier. And throughout all of this, the U.S. Navy, the most powerful naval force in the history of the world, was not providing escorts. Because just days earlier, the U.S. Navy had quietly sent word to oil companies and shipping operators that it was unable to guarantee protection for vessels attempting to transit the Strait due to, and this is a direct description from the reporting, the high risk of Iranian strikes. So the ships were told to go. The Navy had already pulled back. The mines had just been confirmed. And Iran struck 3 vessels in a single day. Pause for a second and just think about that sequence. 3 vessels in one day. Did that number surprise you? Because it surprised me when I first put the timeline together. Tell me your reaction in the comments below. After the strikes, the U.S. Navy made something official that had been quietly understood for several days. A U.S. Navy official described the Strait of Hormuz as an Iranian danger zone for any vessel attempting to cross it. That is not the language of a military force that is in control of the situation. That is the language of a force that is acknowledging, officially on the record, that a waterway critical to the global economy is currently operating under terms set by the other side. And Iran backed that up almost immediately. Iranian officials stated publicly that the Strait was now under the full control of the IRGC Navy. Not contested, not disputed, under full control. Now here is where the picture gets even more complicated, because the Strait is not a simple on-off switch. Iran has been playing a more nuanced game with access to the waterway, and today that game became visible in a way that illustrates just how much leverage is now sitting on Iran's side of the table. India, one of the world's largest oil importers, had been in direct diplomatic talks with Iran about allowing Indian-flagged vessels to pass safely through the Strait. At one point today, reports emerged confirming that Iran had agreed to grant that access. Indian government officials publicly announced it. News agencies reported it. Then hours later, Iranian sources denied it. No agreement, no safe passage. The confirmation had apparently been premature, or the situation had changed between the announcement and the denial. Meanwhile, China, Russia, and Pakistan were reported to have uninterrupted access. Their ships were passing freely. What this shows is that the Strait has effectively been transformed from a neutral international waterway into something that functions more like a checkpoint, where passage depends on which country you are from and what your relationship with Iran currently looks like. That is an extraordinary shift in how one of the world's most critical trade routes operates. And it happened in under 2 weeks. Now let us zoom all the way out. Because everything we have covered so far, the tankers, the mines, the Navy pulling back, the Axis confusion, all of it connects directly to the daily lives of people who are nowhere near this conflict. When commercial shipping through the Strait gets disrupted, the effects do not stay in the Persian Gulf. They travel. Oil that cannot move through that waterway has to go a different route, around the southern tip of Africa, adding weeks to the journey and significantly increasing the cost. Those increased costs get passed on to refineries, to distributors, to fuel stations. To you, the next time you fill up your car or pay your heating bill, and the disruption is already being priced in. Reports today noted that the average price of a gallon of gas in the United States has already risen to $3.58. For context, that increase represents a direct economic consequence landing in the pockets of ordinary people who have nothing to do with any of this. People in Kentucky, people in Germany, people in Japan, people in Brazil. The conflict is in the Middle East, the fuel bill is global, and then there's the broader economic cost. The Pentagon presented Congress today with a figure that puts the scale of all this in stark terms. The military operation in Iran cost over $11 billion in just the first 6 days. $11 billion in 6 days. For comparison, that is more than the annual budget of many mid-sized countries, spent in less than a week. That money does not come from nowhere. It comes from the same budgets that fund infrastructure, healthcare, education, and public services. And it is being spent at a rate that, if sustained, would represent one of the most expensive military operations in recent history. Where are you watching from right now? Because the fuel price impact from this is already hitting countries that have absolutely nothing to do with this conflict. Tell me your country in the comments, and whether you are already feeling it at the pump or in your energy bills. I read every single comment. And then there is one final piece of today's story that adds a layer of context to everything we have covered. U.S. intelligence released an assessment today, reported by Reuters, confirming that Iran's government is still largely intact, still functioning, still not at risk of any kind of internal collapse in the near term. Now think about what that means alongside everything else. $11 billion spent, 3 commercial vessels struck in a single day. The world's most important energy corridor declared a danger zone, the U.S. Navy pulling back from escort duties. mines confirmed in the shipping lanes. And the intelligence assessment from the U.S.'s own agencies is the entity on the other side of all of this is still intact and not going anywhere. Meanwhile, CENTCOM, the U.S. military's central command, released a statement today noting that Iran's air capabilities are being systematically reduced. So from a purely military standpoint, there are real gains being reported. The situation is not one-sided. But the combination of those two realities, military progress on one side and an adversary that remains intact and is now controlling the world's most important shipping lane on the other, is exactly the tension that is going to define what happens in the coming days. And here's where things stand tonight. Commercial ships were publicly encouraged to enter a waterway that the U.S. Navy had already quietly stopped protecting. Mines had just been confirmed in those same waters, described by the U.S. military itself as the most destructive weapons its Navy has faced. 3 vessels were struck in a single day. The Strait of Hormuz has been officially called a danger zone. Iran now controls who gets through and who does not. China, Russia, and Pakistan pass freely. Everyone else negotiates, or takes the long way around Africa. $11 billion spent in 6 days. Fuel prices rising globally. U.S. intelligence confirming the other side is still completely intact. And somewhere in the Persian Gulf tonight, the crews of 3 commercial ships are dealing with the consequences of an order that told them the water was safe. The order was given. The ships went in. Iran was waiting. But what is your opinion on this? Comment down below. If you are curious to find more, then make sure to click on one of the videos you see on the screen. And with that, we come to the end of this video. If you enjoyed the video, then turn on the notifications bell on this channel. Also, please share this video with as many people as possible. Let's get this news out there.